Hi, everybody. This is Justin Beals, the CEO and co-founder of StrikeGraph, and we're really excited to host this video podcast opportunity. This is the first one of these that we're doing, and I'm just overjoyed to have Sam Oberholtzer from our team, compliance guru, audit extraordinaire, uh, to chat with a little bit. We hope to make this kind of a regular opportunity to discuss some of the issues that we're seeing in security compliance, and also technology and product and what people are building. Sam, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. And I'm really excited that we're going to have these little snippets, especially as we start the new year. There's going to be a lot more craziness starting. As soon as busy season ends, there's a lot more that's going to come from that.
Yeah.
So yeah, how have you been? How have you been as we're kind of ramping up the year and you're doing budgeting, we're planning out 2022.
And it's audit season, right? On
Hmm.
top of all of it. Yeah, I don't know what it is about Q4, but everybody wants to get everything done all at the same kind of moment. My understanding, of course, traditionally I played the role of chief technology officer, so I was the consumer of the audit product. But that for auditors, this is a nightmare season, right? Like you've got everybody trying to get their audit kind of accomplished on their commitment by the year end, and you're just trying to move everybody through. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Just like your side, or notoriously your side, is stressed out about getting all their ducks in a row, trying to figure out how they're going to complete the audit in timely manner. The auditors also have lots of projects going on. We have, or I keep saying we as if I'm still an auditor, but my ex auditor self, I can definitely side with the audit firms. They not only have deadlines within their contracts for their companies, but they're also relying on all these companies to get everything in on time. So it's always kind of a trickle down effect for them.
I always feel like in these super chaotic moments, like having a clear head and a focus on what you're trying to do is really the only way to tackle the problem. And I think one of the things we wanted to talk to about today is how do I kind of survive Q4, both, you know, well, especially as the organization that needs to get audited. And I think being very, um, you know, being very capable of making your auditor efficient too. I'm sure that your customer has some impact on your ability to get it done quickly. So, what's your advice for companies that are really trying to move through an audit quickly? It's a stressful time. They're pressuring the auditor themselves. How do you keep calm and audit on, so to speak, Sam? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of tasks or steps that companies, and especially our customers that might not have an audit quite yet, but just want to prep because they might be overwhelmed with year end with all of their business tasks, and so I think we can kind of break it down in a couple of ways. So I would recommend that if they are starting to prep for audit is to really think about the scope and what would that entail. And so to me, scope really would entail your services for your customers. What do you want in this report? What do you care about to actually start your foundation with the security aspect?
So, Sam, let me ask a question here because I mean, scope means a lot to me as a CTO and a product person. It's the greatest lever I have on actually getting something delivered on time. I think there's a perception. I've certainly had the perception that scope was very fixed depending on the standard, like SOC 2 required all this. But I think what you're telling me and what I've certainly learned is that scope is very malleable depending on the organization, right?
Yeah. And you know what? Like, even before, our customers, or even before new startups start thinking about, okay, all these plethora of controls, I really want them to think in a smaller lens for now,
Hmm.
because, or else they're going to make themselves crazy. They're going to start picking their financial systems, their education systems. So, really, especially from the audit side, we really want to think about what systems are directly impacting your customer data. So meaning if you're a SaaS company, okay, let's think about your application. Let's think about your web-based application first, and then the underlying infrastructure behind that. And then that's what we want to start with.
Yeah. It seems that the critical part of the data here in identifying scope is that's because that's what's sensitive. That's what you're trying to secure. So the risk is with the data, understanding where that sensitive data lives is how you can identify the things you need to secure, right?
Is absolutely. And again, I do want everyone to know that we are talking about a little bit more of our foundational audits. So
Yeah.
thinking about like our SOC 2, maybe
Hmm.
even our ISO, even though it's a little bit more of a stretch. Definitely not Sarbanes-Oxley 404 for public
Yeah.
companies. Definitely no. But that's why I think it's if they can think about the scope, think about what systems, and then think about what those systems hold, what type of data,
Yeah.
then we have then they should have a little bit of a clearer picture instead of picking everything at
Yeah.
first. Let's start a little bit
Yeah.
smaller. Think about the services and then the systems and then the
Oh,
data.
yeah. I have this phrase in my head, in the product world, we a lot of times talk about what's our minimum viable product. And I think about this as like, what's my minimum viable compliance, for the trust I
Yes.
need to get. So let's say that I've done a good job, Sam. I'm working, with a great team, and we've got a good scope identified for what we need to secure. And we've kind of minimized it, so that we can get through that first audit more easily. What's the next thing that I could focus on?
Absolutely. And so you kind of brought it up. You kind of led me into that direction a little bit. Is your team? Is your team? It's understanding, okay, who would be involved, or at least let's figure out what categories would be involved, because sometimes those categories are held by the same person, especially with the startups that we are seeing or helping with, whether helping them prepare or trying to figure out, you know, um, in that direction. So let's talk about, okay, what areas are our foundation that we would talk about. Definitely IT. I know IT is a
Right.
huge bucket,
Yeah.
but we can even narrow that down to, okay, if you have an application, we're definitely going to have your developers, or maybe a head or lead, where we want someone at least in infrastructure that's going to be helping gather. We want HR, because
Mm.
they're the ones, typically going to be handling onboarding, termination process. They're
Yep.
going to be handling, policies, that kind of paperwork. And then lastly, this can kind of be like a give or take, but legal. A lot of the times, the legal people might handle your vendor management, vetting. And so whoever that might be, that's also very important um, to the success of your foundation of your report.
I can see how powerful this is because maybe in the past, what I imagine, whoever, we have a joke going that the person that's in charge of compliance was the person that wasn't in the office that day when it kind of got tasked out. So whoever's kind of owning it winds up in this really horrible situation where they're kind of keeping in their head the list of controls that need to be operated or evidence. And they literally have to go hunt down a person and say, like, can you give me that offboarding process document? Where in actuality, if I just said, hey, you're responsible for HR, here are the things that you contribute to compliance, and was able to centralize that communication, I can see how that would make you a lot more efficient in getting all the data collected that you need to hand over to the auditor.
Absolutely. And I think it just makes the people that are actually accountable and that actually own the process or own that certain area, it makes them more aware and what to expect and predict of what the audit's going to be looking like. So
Right.
I think it might make potentially the process a little bit more efficient.
Yeah. It also breeds, one of the things you're hoping to do is create a culture of security.
Yes.
I've had a lot of conversations lately where I was like, it's not just about technology security, it's about the rest of the security practices that you need to do. And certainly the standards make you cover those areas. And if you can share the ownership of the whole practice and you kind of bring that culture into the operations. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I 100% agree with that point. I have one of our customers that are pretty much starting from scratch, meaning like not even a little bit of their processes are even in place.
Yeah.
And so what I'm finding is that you can tell someone how to build a governance, but then trying to make the people follow it is the hardest obstacle.
Yeah.
Is actually trying to fit. So if you're starting to bake that actually accountability, baking out the importance of security as you're building roles,
Hmm.
then you can kind of stop or minimize that risk of um, a risk of, I guess, people almost not even not following, but the risk of being part of those organizations that have
Yeah.
to play catch up to the compliance when compliance can naturally fall after.
I didn't remember that I needed this control, or I didn't collect the
Yeah,
evidence, or
just
now we're scrambling to try and pull it all
yeah.
together. Yeah.
Instead
Okay.
of letting it happen naturally, like
Yeah.
just kind of doing the control, like it's part of your everyday job instead of just trying to prove it when the audit is there.
Absolutely. Well,
Hmm.
which leads us to, the auditor themselves.
Hmm.
And so, what's our next piece of advice for maintaining some sanity through this process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's jotting down in their minds right there their deadlines, their
Hmm.
internal timelines, and not only communicating that with the team, but then also understanding what their stakeholders' requirements are.
Yeah.
Because again, this will help kind of break out tasks, but then also understand what they need to do to be successful.
Yeah.
Instead of being stressed out and trying to not only create, implement, and then gather as they're almost hitting their deadline.
Right. I could definitely, there are a lot of milestones that we know of, and I think getting at least those milestones down and backing out from the audit date that you're working against will
Yep.
let you measure how far away you are from the audit date and maintain that sanity. Now, some of those milestones that I think of are like, just that initial scoping, right, that we talked about. What are my controls?
Hmm.
That probably leads to scoping of the evidence. I always think one thing that gets left behind or is like a last minute is like the system description. Like if you can get ahead of writing the system description. Um,
Right.
and one thing you've told me about is any of the annual practices that are checked in. What are some of those?
Yeah. So, well, of course, we got our policies, but
Hmm.
then some of the annual controls that a lot of people might not think about are the ones that might indirectly impact the systems or the data.
Okay.
So, some of the annual controls that our customers or even people that are thinking about going on can start practicing and put in practice now are all right, let's do an annual security training
Yeah.
or privacy training or both. And let's make our employees go through that. You can create a PowerPoint that shows them some of these practices. Let's think about how we want to even evaluate the performance of our employees. What kind of standard are we holding them at? It does not have to relate to compensation, even though
Right.
that's naturally what it is, but it's at least helping them reach their career goals, their pathway, etc. And this doesn't even have to be a certain standard. We just want to make sure that you guys are like that they're having conversations with their employees so that they don't have to lead into sanctions.
It's how
Um,
you want to design it, right? Like
Absolutely.
it's not, it's just that the auditor wants to see that you have some focus in the area and have created some security habit around it, right?
Absolutely. And that it's actually being performed for every employee.
Yeah.
Executive management it starts getting a little gray area, but
Oh,
we
those
still encourage.
executives. Yeah.
And then, which puts me at another thing, the org chart, like actually creating one and start drafting up reporting lines, doing
Yeah.
accountability. Of course, this might be a little different for that one person startup. I'm not talking to you out there, but it's still kind of creating, what this like building, you're almost building the blueprint for the processes.
Right.
And then one thing that you're going to love is the risk assessment.
Hmm.
Start thinking about how your risk of your business, start thinking about your threats, vulnerabilities, and let's start putting numbers to it.
Yeah.
Let's start rating. And so even if I know that seems a little bit overwhelming as self, but it doesn't have to be robust. It could be something that could be worked on ongoing a little bit as you think about it.
Yeah, certainly at StrikeGraph, it's fundamental for us in our customer engagements to use risk as a scoping mechanism to kind of minimize, to get that minimum viable compliance put together. Not a checklist of things that didn't necessarily matter to me, but the types of security habits or controls that mitigated a risk that I see for my business. Well, Sam, I'm sure you're super happy to be on this side of the audit business a little bit and not crunching this Q4 this time around.
Oh my God. I am not just excited about it, I'm excited that I get to expand my career, not just with audit and compliance, but I'm actually thinking about security and the importance of that.
Yeah,
And just having the mindset of being more helping, I guess, helping organizations before they get to audit and really starting to create those honestly best practices instead of that checklist that, like you said,
yeah,
because audit is a little bit like a checklist. And, depending on what it is, but we're trying here to create an environment where you're minimizing that risk and not just creating a checklist.
absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, and I love it. I'm ecstatic.
Well, then I hope you enjoy your holidays, and I can't wait to do another one of these segments with you. Thanks again, Sam, for joining me. Thanks for anyone that gets an opportunity to listen. Please feel free to let us know at StrikeCraft if we can be of some help on your compliance journey. And have a great holidays, everyone.
Thank you.